Good evening and welcome to the first 5 St Andrews Hill Pupillage Open Evening. Thank you to you all for attending, and a big thank you from me to all of our panel members for giving up their time this evening. My name's Dan Jones. I'm one of the junior tenants here at 5 St Andrews Hill. I was called to the bar in 2013, and then after a couple of years working as a paralegal, I commenced pupillage at Chambers between 2015 and 2016, when I was fortunate enough to be invited to join as a tenant. I practice predominantly in criminal law and the proceeds of crime, and I also sit on Chambers' Pupillage Committee. As I hope you have seen from our handbook or our website, we're offering 2 pupillages to start in October 2022. And they will be advertised and managed in line with the Pupillage Gateway timetable. A note about our pupillages: although Chambers is a multidisciplinary set, we have a range of practice teams which include our criminal team, our family team, and our extradition team, to name but a few. We are advertising for a criminal pupillage. There may be opportunities to see other areas of practice during your pupillage. For example, if your supervisor works in another area of law, for example, Sarah Wood, who's on the event this evening, she practices in crime, the proceeds of crime, and family law. But applicants should have a keen interest in, and indeed expect, a predominantly criminal pupillage. So the aim of this event really is to take you through the whole journey of pupillage at 5 St Andrews Hill, starting from the application stage, taking you through life as a pupil in Chambers, and into tenancy and indeed beyond. So dealing with the application process, as well as some interview do's and don'ts, will be Francesca Levitt, John Oliver, who should be joining us in a few moments, and Alexandra Davey. Then to talk about life as a pupil at 5 St Andrews Hill will be our 3 most recent pupils who've all recently accepted tenancy. That's Alexa Lemoyne, Joe O'Leary, and Amy Wolfson. And then finally, to discuss a little bit about life after pupillage, we have Sarah Wood and John Crawford. But before we get into that, I just want to give you 5 reasons why we think you should apply to 5 St Andrews Hill. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, we would say that our retention rate of pupils into tenants is fantastic. Certainly since I was taken on in 2016, we've taken on all of our pupils as tenants, and we do offer pupillage with a view to tenancy. Secondly, Chambers has outstanding quality of work. We are leaders in our field, particularly in proceeds of crime, criminal prosecutions, and extradition. And that helps us to have a really strong financial base, which has helped us through this pandemic when perhaps other sets haven't been able to cope quite as well. Thirdly, we also think the structure of our pupillage is important. We offer 3 4-month periods of pupillage, each with a different supervisor. And we think that's particularly important because it means that pupils have the same supervisor at the end of their first 6 and at the start of their second 6, which really helps in that tough transition and that important transition. We also have in place a rigorous programme of advocacy training, and you also have the support and guidance from the whole set, not just your supervisor. Fourthly, we have a strong, although it's not been quite as strong this year, social life within Chambers, and we definitely encourage pupils to be involved in our events to solicitors, social events within Chambers, Christmas parties, drinks after court, and all that sort of thing. We really encourage our pupils to get involved in the social side of Chambers. And following on from that, the final point why we think you should apply to us, there is a very, very strict rule in Chambers that pupils do not pay for drinks. Having said all of that, and without any further ado, can I hand over to Francesca Levitt.
In fact, are you going to be talking to Alex Davey first? Because I think Davey is going to be talking us through the application form process.
I'll hand over to Alex then.
Thank you.
I'm Alexandra Davey. I'm also a junior tenant practicing in Chambers. I do crime and family work. I joined Chambers as a third six pupil in the summer of 2017, and I was then taken on as a tenant later that year. I've been a member of the Pupillage Committee for the last 18 months or so. And I have to say, it's a genuine privilege to help in the selection of the new pupils. And you can tell how seriously we take the process from the retention rate that Dan mentioned a minute ago. The committee, I think, is friendly and welcoming, just as Chambers is as a whole. And we genuinely want the candidates to do the absolute best they can, because that helps us to make the best choices and informed decisions for our pupils. I'm going to speak a little bit about the application forms themselves, the dreaded forms. We anonymise our forms that come through the Pupillage Gateway. So we don't have your name, we don't have your schools, and we don't have your universities. We think that gives everybody a completely level playing field when they're having their forms marked. The forms are evenly distributed amongst the committee members, and the numbers vary from year to year, but last year we had about 250 applicants in total. Those forms are scored according to a fixed set of criteria, and the marks are then submitted to the head of the committee. A number of the forms are then randomly selected and recirculated for marking by another member of the committee, effectively a sample to ensure that we're marking across the committee members, we're marking the forms in the same way. There's no set number that go on from there, but last year the top approximately 70 candidates were selected for first round interview. In terms of tips for the forms themselves, please check and double check for typos, for spelling and grammar, and for relevance to our chambers. There's nothing worse for me than an otherwise promising candidate who just can't demonstrate the attention to detail. Either the form's got mistakes or it hasn't really been tailored to our chambers or our practice areas, and it becomes obvious very quickly. The last thing I want to say really, and the most important probably, is that the standard of applicants is incredible. I'm quite sure that's not just to our set. If you're applying, you either have already or you're working towards the academic requirements that everybody will have. And from there, I'm always completely blown away by the standard of the vast majority of candidates. The exam results, the work experience, the extracurricular efforts, everything really. So many of the candidates are truly outstanding. It's really humbling to look at the applicants that we receive. And the point is not to frighten you, it's just to say that we want you to apply and we want you to stand out. You're applying in an exceptional crowd, so stand out from the crowd. When we're marking our respective batches of these incredible forms, why is yours different? What are we going to remember you for? What's going to make us want to meet you in person? It's not easy, but try and show us your personality through the form, because that's how you stand out. And that's how you get selected for the first round interview. And if you are successful in that first round interview, I'll pass over to Francesca Levitt, who's the head of our Pupillage Committee, and is going to tell you about the first round interviews.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am Francesca Levitt. I am 23 years cool, and I practice predominantly in crime and in the proceeds of crime. And as Alexandra has just said, I am the head of the Pupillage Committee. I've actually been on the committee for I think it's 12 years, it might be longer. And I have to say I'm incredibly proud of being on the committee and of the hard work that we've done, because all of our pupils have been recruited as tenants, and some of them are in fact appearing on this webinar. So I'm going to take full credit for all of their talents. But I am going to talk to you about first round interviews. And first thing that will happen when you are aware of having a first round interview is you'll get an email from me, and that will be asking you to get in touch with one of our designated clerks who deals with pupillage in order to organise your appointment date and time. Now, I have to say that all of our interviews are a bit fast paced in the first round. We only schedule them for 10 minutes each, because we have lots of people that we want to speak to, and first impressions really do count. But all of our interviews are in the evening, and we hope at least that you'll be able to find a time and a date that you are available to come and join us. Now, we appreciate that when attending an interview, you're likely to feel anxious about it, and you're likely to worry about it, and you'll want to make the right first impression. Well, I can't impress upon you enough to just be yourself. We don't want you to put on airs and graces. We don't want you to behave in a way that you think we want you to behave. We want you to be just yourself. We want your personality to shine through. Whether you are naturally quiet and considered, or whether you are naturally larger than life, we don't mind. We just want you to be you, so that we can get to know you a bit better. So the first part of the interview will be just getting to know you. The second part of the interview is either going to be a legal question that we'll raise with you, or it's going to be a discussion topic. And normally the subjects that we raise in discussion is something that's interesting or unusual or particularly relevant as a current affair at that particular time. You're not told in advance of your interview what that topic will be or what the legal question will be, so you can't do any preparation in advance other than perhaps calming your nerves. But you will be required to attend your interview 30 minutes in advance of your scheduled time so that you can receive the paperwork and you can then read through it and prepare whatever representations you wish to make. Now, the whole point of the discussion topic or the legal question is that we want to know how good you are at putting your point across, how persuasive you are, your attention to detail. To be honest, as barristers, we've all had cases where we are only as good as our facts, and our facts may not be particularly attractive. So it's really what we do with them, and we want you to do the best you can with the facts that we give you. One worry that you may have is whether you'll be disadvantaged because, for instance, you may not have completed your degree, or you might just have started your bar vocational course or something along those lines. Well, I want to put your mind at rest in that regard. We do take into account the stage that you're at, and no one will be disadvantaged by the fact that they may not have finished their law degree, or they may not have even studied a law degree. We do take that into account. Any material that you're expected to know about, we would have given you in advance in that 30-minute slot, so that all you need to do is read it and understand the instructions that are given to you. So pretty straightforward, nothing to worry about. As I say, we really want you to have the opportunity to show us your personality and your persuasive skills when it comes to the discussion. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions if you really want to, but I'll put in a little request at this stage. If it's really not an absolutely urgent issue that you want to have addressed, and it's not something you're likely to find on the website, please don't ask it. That may seem a little harsh, but all of the information that you will need to know is on the website or it's on our advert. But I don't want to discourage questions, but I kind of do in a way as well. But on that note, I will hand over to John Oliver, who's going to tell you about second interviews, because if you're lucky enough to get through the first round, you will be invited to a second round interview, and John is now going to tell you all about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Francesca. Firstly, I hope I don't repeat anything that's already been said. I've just whizzed in from court and missed the beginning of the presentation. But in terms of between first round and second round, what happens? Well, we look at the applications usually by the end of all of the interviews having taken place at first round. And invariably, we make a decision about those who will go through to the second round within a week. That's within a week of the end of first round interviews. And so if you're invited to a second round interview, what you can expect almost again invariably is a 6-member panel of the Pupillage Committee taking you through, or you taking us through, an advocacy exercise, usually and traditionally, I suppose, a bail application or a plea in mitigation, where your objective is to demonstrate your advocacy skills. Now, obviously, some people won't have completed bar school. Some people will apply at degree stage, and that is something that we do take into account. What we're looking at is the way that you present, how you're able to articulate your arguments, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it, as indeed is the case when you get to the bar eventually. Following the advocacy exercise, we sometimes have a little bit of a discussion about the topic that was or formed the subject of the advocacy exercise. Questions about why you took a particular approach or why you made a particular argument. And then we move on to a broad question and answer session, which is a bit more in depth than it would have been during the first round interview. And really our objective is to identify people that we would want as tenants, because as you will see in a lot of the documentation that's been put out on social media, on Chambers' website, and a couple of the videos that we've put onto YouTube, we recruit with a view to tenancy. We have a good record of taking on pupils into tenancy. And so that really is an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit better, to know more about your motivations, to know more about your application, your experiences. And really what we're looking for is people who are able to take what they've put into their application form, their experiences and their education, and translate all of that in a persuasive way, in a confident way, into an argument about why you would be a good pupil, firstly, and secondly, a good barrister at 5 St Andrews Hill. And it seems an obvious thing to say, but some people present really well on paper, but then don't necessarily present that well in interview and find it difficult to communicate why it is that they're particularly motivated, why it is they've chosen 5 St Andrews Hill, and in some cases why they want to be a barrister at all. So it's something you really need to give some thought to. Once that process is completed, once we get to the end of all the interviews for second round, we usually fairly quickly make a decision about the people to whom we would like to offer pupillage. But of course, we can't make any offers until the gateway deadline or the gateway date for the publication and communication of offers. So again, I'll invite questions perhaps at the end rather than now. And I'm passing on to, let me just check my notes, Alexa.
Yes, I'm Alexa Lewitt. I'm a tenant having completed pupillage just in mid-October. So obviously it's still very, very a fresh experience for me. As Dan mentioned, pupillage is divided into 3 lots of 4 months, which means that you benefit from having 3 different supervisors and seeing a wide variety of work. This resulted in my first 6 observing not only criminal matters in the Crown Court, I observed trials of GBH, drugs conspiracies and rapes in my first 6 months, but also experience work in the Magistrates' Court a little closer to home as to what you would be starting out with in your second 6. Due to having 3 different supervisors in that period, I also had the opportunity to observe inquests, do some public law, some extradition and some immigration. So an opportunity to have a real mixture alongside the main criminal practice. Not every day of my first 6 was spent in court. Occasionally there are some days where you could be doing written work for your supervisor or for other members of chambers. There's a wide variety of written work that I undertook. This included drafting advices, research on particular areas of law, and sentencing notes that can be a real fantastic opportunity for feedback to learn for once you're on your feet yourself. Also had on occasion days out in the High Court, so it's a real jam-packed learning experience in those first 6 months, spent not only with your supervisors but also with other members of chambers where it works with their diaries. Also had the opportunity to undertake a noting brief, so there's a real variety in the first 6 to learn and prepare you as best you can. At the end of first 6, you tend to spend time with some of the juniors in the magistrates court to begin to prepare you to be on your feet and observe the types of cases that you soon will be responsible for. Second 6, starting on your feet, I can remember greatly as a mixture of terror and excitement that continues for quite some period. But I benefited enormously from the support of not only the clerks, but also every member of chambers for the many questions that I had once I started. There are so many things, new things to learn every single day once you're on your feet. And every single member of chambers is behind you and supporting you in doing that. My second 6, I primarily did crime work, but was also instructed in the occasional family case and the occasional extradition case, and was also given the opportunity to undertake some public law review work. So this really enables you to experience what you like, what you dislike, and begin to think about how you might want to establish your practice in the years to come. For cases in the magistrates court, you would often get papers the night before, which can be incredibly daunting when you first start on your feet, but it is amazing how quickly that becomes the normal status quo. A mixture of prosecution lists and defence work was primarily what I did in my second 6. This would range from first appearances to trials to sentences to also dealing with probation matters and the occasional appearance in the Crown Court as well. And the second 6 is a really important time to begin to build relationships with your instructing solicitors, but also build your confidence that once you're flying solo, the learning process really does begin. And yet chambers are only ever a message or a phone call away. And this provides a huge security once you are in second 6 and out on your own with your own clients. And there's also opportunities during pupillage to collaborate with members of chambers on articles for particular areas of law. LexisNexis often provide opportunities such as this, which is great to increase your exposure to members of chambers that you might not necessarily have spent time with, met in court or met in chambers itself. I'll pass you over now to Amy Wolfson, who is going to speak specifically about pupillage, but during the rather unprecedented time of a pandemic.
Thank you, Alexa. Hi, my name's Amy Wolfson. I got tenancy at the same time as Alexa and Joe, who you will be hearing from. I did my first degree with the Open University, and I worked for about 10 years before I came to the bar, not in law, but in engineering and also in politics, so not the standard route. I did an 18-month pupillage at another criminal chambers, and then I joined 5 St Andrews Hill in May as a third 6 pupil, and I got tenancy in September. So pupillage in pandemic, the first thing I would say is, well, it was odd in a lot of ways. My first proper visit to chambers was after I'd got tenancy. I didn't even come in for my interview, so that was an odd experience. On the other hand, it was nice in a way not to feel any pressure to be in chambers after court every day. And although it does make it a bit harder to meet people, it certainly didn't make it impossible. Members of chambers have lots of online activities like a quiz, which I can assure you is genuinely fun. Virtual drinks amongst the junior members. There's also a pupils WhatsApp group. And I should say I genuinely didn't feel any sense of competition between myself and Joe and Alexa. And I think that's because Chambers makes it very clear that you're not in competition. And I think the retention of pupils really speaks for itself. There's also a junior tenants WhatsApp group, which I found incredibly helpful. I never once felt like I couldn't ask a question in that group, or that confessing I didn't know the answer to something, or I was worried about something. I never felt like that might count against me in my tenancy application. When I was thinking about how pupillage is different in the pandemic to before the pandemic, one thing I made a note of was that every court seems to have a different approach to the coronavirus. But to be honest, that's not that different to how things were before the pandemic. So I think really that the message is you've got to be flexible and work with people. There's a lot of people on the front line doing a difficult job when you're in the criminal courts, and people are worried about their health. So you've got to be sensitive to that. There are a couple of pluses about pupillage in a pandemic. With remote working, there's a few less early morning starts and 6 a.m. trains, so I'm grateful for that. And although I think I've probably spent a bit less time in the Crown Court than I might have otherwise done, I think I've had more of my own work rather than covering work for other people. So I'm quite content with that, really. All in all, I'd just say that I think 5 St Andrews Hill is a great set. And I've certainly never felt that coming from a less straightforward background has been something that's been a disadvantage to me. Anyway, I'll pass over to Joe now, who's going to talk about the tenancy application process.
Thanks, Amy. Yes, so my name is Joe O'Leary. I'm also a very junior tenant in Chambers. I got tenancy in October with Amy and Alexa. And I have been asked to talk a bit about the application process and how you transfer from being a pupil to a tenant. I think the first thing to say, and the best thing about Chambers and the tenancy process is all very transparent. There's no cloak and dagger. It's all very open. You know exactly who's on the committee if you want to know, and the procedure set out really, really well. The procedure itself, it takes into account your entire year. It's not like you're judged on the basis of one 10-minute interview, or it's not like someone will focus on one mistake you made back in your first 6. It's not like that. It's very much how you want to put forward your year. There's a few prerequisites of the application that you have to put forward: a covering letter and a CV. I'm sure everyone who's watched this has probably done countless ones of those for other applications. But one of the important things you have to get is references. Now, these are usually from instructing solicitors, and it's usually a very good way to shore up what's hopefully already quite a good relationship. It's quite nice when you approach them and ask for a reference in there. I think it's also quite nice to read them sometimes as well if they're positive. But it doesn't just have to be a solicitor. It can be anybody. I certainly got them from opponents or the judiciary, or they're all people are generally quite forthcoming in writing them. People want you to do well. And I think that is also what's very clear about the Chambers tenancy process, is that fundamentally, I think everybody on the tenancy committee actually does want you to do well. I don't think anybody's looking for you to trip up. I don't think anyone's looking for you to fail. People genuinely want to see you succeed, like Francesca said at the start. You know, you're picked by members of Chambers. They want to see you hopefully as a success and not a failure. That's probably cost Chambers quite a bit of money. So aside from references, you also have references from all 3 of your supervisors over the year. Again, it's another quite good way to make sure that your best year is put forward, and I'm sure hopefully they won't concentrate on, like I said, tiny mistakes, but hopefully the progress that you've made throughout the entire year. And the other good thing you can put forward is 2 pieces of your written work, and that's a chance for you to showcase what you've done. And again, the whole process of Chambers, the application process, it is quite flexible, and it's quite up to you how you want to put forward your best self in picking those 2 pieces of work. Usually it's something you've done for a supervisor, which is quite complicated and long, and usually something you've done probably in the Mags Court for yourself, which is usually less complicated and long, but it's a good way to make sure you show everything that you can do. But of course, as I've said, Chambers is flexible. They want you to do well. There are, of course, deadlines. The tenancy application process usually happens in the last month of your tenancy, your pupillage, sorry, get that right. It usually happens the last month of your pupillage. but it's quite a quick process, and you'll usually put out your misery quite quickly. So whilst it's quite stressful, it's quite a tough time, they don't draw it out, which is quite nice. So you know usually one way or the other, and we were all told, obviously we're very lucky and we were all taken on, but I think if it doesn't go your way, I think Chambers is very supportive in making sure that you're not just cast out into the dark, but there'll be something left for you to do afterwards. But like I said, making one mistake at one point in the year shouldn't affect anything. Chambers wants you to do well, they want you to be successful, and they want you to be a tenant. And of course, everyone in Chambers will help you through the application. No one's trying to hide anything from you. I know for a fact when I was trying to work out which references or which solicitors to approach for a good reference, the clerks are very good at just saying, well, you've had a good result here, so why don't you ask them? Or if you weren't sure how to approach it, they offered to do it for me, which was great, because like I keep saying, everyone in Chambers does genuinely want you to succeed. I know that was a very brief run through of what isn't too complicated a process, but the tenancy process in Chambers is swift, and it does really allow you to put your best self forward. I think now I'm passing over to John Crawford, who will talk about life as soon as you start tenancy.
Thanks, Joe. So I'm John. I've been at Chambers for a few years now. I've been a tenant for 3 years, and yeah, really just to talk through about that transition from being a pupil one day to then hopefully getting that phone call confirming that you're now a tenant, and sort of how your practice changes and how the best way to make the most of that situation. And one of the first things I really think is a positive to do is to have a conversation with the clerks in Chambers and speak to them now that when you're a tenant about what you want to do, the areas of work that you want to go into, and also the things that perhaps you're not so keen on doing and the areas that you don't want to focus on as much. Because as everyone said, the clerks and everyone else there in Chambers are trying to support you and trying to help you grow. So if you speak to them and tell them what you want to do, that only helps you progress and move forward. It's obviously important to remember that it's always going to be a gradual progress. And so if you say one day into your tenancy, oh, I only want to be doing 10-week Crown Court trials, that's obviously not really very realistic. But having that conversation and opening up those lines of communication really help you grow and help you work towards where you want to be in sort of 3, 4, 5 years' time. I think one of the other things that's really important to bear in mind is that even though you're then no longer a pupil, it's absolutely not the case that you're just then left on your own or expected to know everything yourself. You've still obviously got all of your supervisors who you can call and speak to and check about anything at all. But then it's far wider than that as well, as people have said. There are all the other junior barristers, as said, within the WhatsApp group who you can speak to check things with. Already anyone else in Chambers is always happy if you've got a call, just want to check something with them. So it's really a lot of lines of support open to you, and absolutely no one expects you to suddenly know everything. And one of the other big things that I know Sarah will go into in a bit more detail is the mentoring scheme that Chambers has, but I'll leave her to go through that in a bit more detail in a moment. Just going back to the sort of type of work that you'd then be expected going on transitioning from pupillage to tenancy. Obviously, it's not going to change overnight. I found that my biggest experience, the best experience of the type of work that I was doing, that in reality, going from being a pupil to a tenant, it didn't change a huge amount in the sort of days and weeks that followed. But really, when the following 6 months later, the pupils after me got on their feet, but then you're obviously moving a little bit up, and with that, the work and the communication that you've had with the clerks and the relationships that you've helped to build really help make sure that your practice sort of slowly starts moving forward in the direction that you want it to go. In terms of other practical sides of things, obviously see within the pupillage handbook, obviously the guaranteed earnings that you get in your second 6 then drop away once you're a tenant. But in reality, the level and the quality of work that Chambers can provide to you, that's never really been an issue for any of the new tenants, and that's certainly not something that you should be concerned about. And so then really in terms of how you should approach and the attitude that you take towards now if you've taken on as a tenant, I think it's one thing that's really important to remember is tone of confidence. You know, be proud of yourself and the achievement that you've had there. You know, your application has gone to everyone in Chambers who looked on it and voted on it and decided that yes, this person's done a good job. and we think they're going to carry on doing a good job. So it can be quite a nice source of confidence. The other thing to remember is that also at that point, you're a self-employed person, you see the opportunity to take holiday when you want, when you can fit around your schedule, and absolutely don't be afraid of doing that either as a tenant or as a pupil, because it's important to remember that even when you're a junior tenant, it's still the very start of the road in terms of building a practice and building on that and growing forward and growing every step of the way. And perhaps on that note, it'd be a good point to hand over to Sarah or Dan as well, who'll just talk a little bit more about how you can grow your practice into different areas, and then Sarah will deal with the mentoring scheme that Chambers offers.
Yeah, thanks, John. So there's not really much I can add to what John said, save just to give an example of how what he's described works in practice. So when I started my practice as a tenant, it was almost exclusively in crime, both in the Magistrates Court and the Crown Court. And then one day out of the blue, I got instructed in a cash forfeiture case by one of my defence solicitors, which are civil proceedings under the Proceeds of Crime Act. It's never something I'd really considered as an area before. Really enjoyed it, really got stuck into that one case, mentioned that to the clerks, and then had a conversation with them. And that's really now become, I'd say, a good portion of my practice is in civil recovery proceedings under the Proceeds of Crime Act. How did I develop that practice? Well, with the assistance of the clerks, mentioning it to other people in Chambers who couldn't have been more supportive. And we're really lucky in Chambers to have some fantastic practitioners in that field, able to speak to them, rely on them, and really grow the practice area from there. And so that's really where Chambers' multidisciplinary practice comes into its own. Perhaps not so much in pupillage, where, as I said at the start, we're really looking for people with an aptitude and passion for the criminal law. But once you become a tenant, Chambers is your oyster, for want of a better expression. If you want to go into family law, great. We've got a strong family team who will support you to do that. If you want to go into, like I ended up doing, civil recovery under the Proceeds of Crime Act, again, fantastic team who can help to do that. Extradition, we've got some people in Chambers who do some civil law, like landlord and tenant. So really, once you're a tenant, that's when the process of diversifying your practice comes into being. But as I say, and just to reiterate, it's a criminal pupillage, and growing your practice really comes after you've completed that. And now just to hand over to Sarah, who will tell you a bit more about the mentoring scheme that we have in Chambers.
Thanks, Dan. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Wood. I am 24 years call. I, in fact, although I'm 1996 call, I didn't in fact get my tenancy at a set of Chambers until the year 2000, and so it took me 4 years to get my tenancy. During the time between 1996 and 2000, I did a total of 3 third six pupillages before I got taken on. The purpose of me telling you that is so that if indeed you end up in that situation yourself, is not to lose heart. It can be a long process between getting pupillage and getting tenancy. Whilst we are very proud of our own retention rate between pupils and tenancy in 5 St Andrews Hill, if you end up going to another set of Chambers and don't get taken on for tenancy at the end of that, please don't lose heart. Don't be discouraged. There are Chambers out there who will make you their home in the long run, so please do keep at it. I wish, though, that when I had been taken on to the set of Chambers in 2000, I wish that I had had the benefit of the mentoring system that we currently have in Chambers. And it's something that we are, rightly so, I think, particularly proud of. The reason why we have the mentoring scheme is, as John Crawford has said, just because you become a tenant, it doesn't necessarily mean that you automatically know everything. In fact, I think I can safely say, and I speak in particular for myself and Francesca, who are long in the tooth, I don't think you ever know everything at the bar, regardless of how many years call you are. And that is really the purpose behind us having the mentoring scheme. Whilst, as John has said, you have the benefit of being able to call upon your previous pupil supervisors,
along with other junior members of tenants of chambers. The main reason why we have the mentoring scheme is so that you can build up a one-to-one relationship with a more senior member of chambers, somebody who is matched to a practice area that you see yourself working in maybe for the next 5 or 10 years. It's as I say, a one-to-one relationship that you can have that's built on trust, so that you can feel able to ask them absolutely anything. It can be about completing your tax return. It can be about registering for VAT. It can be about balancing your personal life with your professional life, about managing your family and home commitments. It can be about absolutely anything. And that is the reason why we have, as I say, the mentoring scheme. And it's, we think, something that works very well for our junior tenants. Again, part of the reason why we are particularly proud of our scheme is that there is a long list of people in chambers who are keen to be mentors. We have one person in chambers who is responsible for organising it, but there are, as I say, a large number of people who are keen to help and support our junior members. And I think that is testimony to the support that we give both our pupils and our junior tenants as a whole in chambers. It's something that, again, we are very proud of, and that's because, dare I say, we think we do it well. We look after our pupils and we look after our junior tenants. You can keep your mentor for as long or as short as you think you need them for. They are there for you and for your benefit. But hopefully, in the long run, we also hope that you will then want to become a mentor yourself and also a pupil supervisor. I'll hand back to you, Dan, for the to deal with maybe some of the Q&A that have been coming in, and any concluding thoughts.
Yeah, just again, on behalf of everybody who's joined this webinar, thanks to our panel for giving up their evenings, and in Francesca's case, for staying late in court after sitting as a recorder this week. We've had a few questions in by email before the event started, and we've had some more come in as the event's gone on. One of the common ones is about academic results. So do you look at A-level grades? Is a pass on the GDL sufficient? Can I make up for a 2-2 if I've got a PhD? And the answer to that really is, as most barristers will give you the answer about this, it depends. It depends on what else you can show us in your application. So if you have perhaps not the strongest academics, but you've got brilliant work experience and you come across really well on the form and you show commitment, then that might balance it out. However, having said that, really our minimum standards are that you've got a 2-1 degree, and that's really our benchmark. But as I say, there can be exceptions to that, but 2-1 really is our minimum. What else have we had? An important one, and this is a question we get asked quite often. Can we sponsor international individuals to do pupillage with us? Unfortunately, the answer is no. We are not an accredited organisation who are able to sponsor international applicants for pupillage. So unfortunately, we cannot offer pupillage to those who don't have a work permit for the UK. One of the questions that came in on the chat was about dyslexia. Again, another important point, Chambers, of course, is committed to equality and diversity for all applicants. If there are extenuating circumstances that relate to your application, there is a section on the form that you can enter those into. And so if there are any extenuating circumstances that we need to be aware of, that can relate to difficulties around exam time, which may have affected exam results, any disabilities we need to be aware of, or anything like that, then please do put them in there. There is a question for Alexa, Amy, and/or Joe. It says, just off the back of what John said in terms of taking holiday, etc., how did you find the work-life balance as a pupil? So I think I'll hand over to any one of those three who want to answer that. Any volunteers?
I think I'm the first person to unmute, so I might as well.
Go on, Joe.
I think work-life balance is something that's important to people in Chambers. People don't want you to burn out. Pupillage is 12 months. It is long. It's not a sprint. I think it'd be silly to not say it. The workload definitely increases once you start on your feet in second six. Like Alexa said, it's not uncommon to get papers the night before, or even sometimes minutes before the hearing. That's part of the, I suppose I see it as the fun and drama of the bar. It's something that I enjoy. But I think work-life balance is important. You are entitled to your 10 days leave in the year. I think it's what the Bar Council recommends, and Chambers certainly has no issue with it. I think when I first started, I asked the same question. Someone said to me, well, it's the last time in your life you're ever going to get paid leave, so you might as well use it this year. So I think I did take all 10 days, I think, and I don't remember there being any backlash from that at all.
Do you mean 10 days in first six, Joe?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's 10 days or 10 days across the 2 6 months. My apologies. Yeah, no, it is. 20 days, see, it's longer. Work-life balance is good. Yeah, it's a pupillage. You have to work hard. You do have to demonstrate a certain amount of skill. You have to demonstrate that you have got a good work ethic, but nobody expects you to work yourself into the ground. It's definitely my experience, unless Alexa or Amy have anything different to add to that.
I only started in May, and the tenancy decision was in September. So I was quite keen not to take holiday if possible. But I guess that's not a usual experience, but certainly when I never had any issues booking holiday. Yeah, and the times when I had a holiday, I did get left alone, which was also great.
I would just say very briefly as well, in relation to work-life balance, my supervisors were always very conscious of how much work I had. If I was being given work by other members of Chambers, just to manage that, to make sure that you're not overloaded and essentially having to promise too much to too many people in too short a time. So they're very conscious of not overburdening you in your first six, particularly when you spend a lot of time doing work for supervisors and other members of Chambers as well.
Great, thanks very much. There's a question about, do we want fully criminally focused applications? There's no harm in saying that you are interested in the other areas of practice that Chambers has, and indeed that shows an awareness of really what we offer at 5 St Andrews Hill. But as I said, there's no harm, but we are looking for people to undertake a criminal pupillage. I hope that answers the question. How many people in the first stage interview? Generally, the entire committee will sit for all interviews if possible. So that's Mark Cotter QC, Francesca Levitt, John Oliver, Alexandra Davey, me, John Crawford, and I think that's the whole committee. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. But generally, the whole committee will sit on all interviews. There are times where we have to split in order to make sure that we can get through enough interviews in one evening. So there will generally be then 2 teams of 3 interviewing. So minimum of 3, maximum 6 normally at first stage interview, and indeed, well, and then in second round, the whole panel will do every interview. There's a question about, would our advice be any different for career changes? No, as long as you can show commitment to a new career at the bar, that's all we're interested in.
I think, Dan, that ties into another question a little bit there. There's one about not having done so well academically at A level, then having gone and had another career and then done particularly well. I think it was a PhD, I think, or whatever, a later postgrad qualification in any event. And I think what people need to understand is that there's no sort of one size fits all, although there are clear indicators of academic ability, and Dan's mentioned one. You know, if you've got a minimum 2-1, great. If you've got anything less than that, but there are mitigating circumstances, again, as Dan's mentioned, then that needs to be explained, and you need to be able to communicate that in the interview. And that comes back to what I said about your performance during the interview, being able to translate what you've got in the application into a persuasive argument for why you should be given pupillage. But if really what we're looking for is excellence. And if you can demonstrate that in different ways, in creative ways from your experiences or from your academic achievements, then great. But that's the bottom line. And we get a lot of questions, you know, what if I have this or what if I have that? And really the point is we're looking for excellence. People are going to be competent pupils who are going to be good barristers, who present well, who are articulate. And I think you need to bear that in mind when you're completing these applications. We don't have a tick box list that we go down and make sure that every single criteria that we've set is met. It's those broad headlines, I suppose.
Thanks, John. There's a lot of questions about interviews this year, whether they're going to be virtual or in person. The short answer is, at the moment, we don't know. I know that's perhaps not the most helpful answer, but I think the plan would be, if we can have in-person interviews, we will. Francesca will tell me if I'm wrong. And we'll see really what the government advice is at the time that we have interviews. If we're able to have in person, that's our preference. It's better for candidates, it's better for us. But if we have to, I think we'll probably look at doing video interviews, but Francesca will confirm.
I can confirm, yes, it's certainly our intention to conduct the evening interviews in chambers, as we always have. And if the government advises that we can't do that, then of course we will have to use remote links, which are now so much better now that we're prepared for a pandemic. And I should indicate as well that if the pandemic is still ongoing, but we can have in-person interviews, but anybody is shielding or has concerns about travelling on public transport to get to us, then of course special accommodation can always be made, and remote interviews can be undertaken. So I don't want anyone to worry about the problems that they may engage in trying to get into chambers for our interviews. Thanks, Dan.
There's another question. Do we accept applications from people who have previously been rejected for pupillage at 5SAH? The answer is yes. I applied the year before I got offered an interview and pupillage, so yes, we do. We don't hold previous applications against anybody.
Can I jump in on minis?
Yep.
A couple of interlinked, perhaps. One really is a concern that because of the pandemic, I think not just ours, but other sets of chambers have had to put a halt on mini pupillages, and clearly some people will have done some before the pandemic, and others have just lost an opportunity to do them. For us, two things: not a prerequisite to have completed a mini at 5 St Andrews Hill in order to apply, of course. But secondly, bear in mind, if you are at an earlier stage, you're in the same boat as other people, and maybe think creatively about how you compensate for that and how you can demonstrate a knowledge of the bar, or the practice of this particular set of chambers, or chambers more broadly. And I think sort of connected to that, there's a question which comes back to what I said before, really. How many mini pupillages are we expected to have done? Again, there's no right or wrong. I think do as many as you think you need to in order to get sufficient understanding of the profession and a particular set of chambers to be able to answer questions in an interview and really justify why it is that you want to be at the bar or at a particular set. How many of those you decide to put on an application form is up to you. My suggestion, and this is just a personal preference, I'd say be selective about the ones you put on the form. You can always talk about having done more during the interview, but there's no real right or wrong answer as far as that's concerned. It's about what you can demonstrate in terms of your understanding and motivations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And certainly for my applications, the year I got pupillage, I didn't list all of my mini pupillages. So yeah, you don't need to list them all. A couple of questions asking, can we elaborate on our criteria for marking applications? The short answer is no. And the reason for that is we don't want you to know what we're looking for so that you tailor your application to tell us what you think we want to hear. We want to hear all about you, all about your experiences and all that sort of thing, so that we can make a decision on you rather than you tailoring your application to suit us. So I hope that answers that question.
Just demonstrate excellence.
Yeah. There was a really interesting question saying, in pupillage, you obviously have a guaranteed income, but after that, with the criminal bar currently being underfunded, how do those just beginning tenancy find it financially? So I'm going to pass over to Amy, who will answer that question.
Thanks, Dan. Firstly, you're obviously not going to make as much money at the criminal bar as you are if you go and do shipping or, I don't know, aviation finance or something like that. But, well, you have an awful lot more of a fun and interesting career doing crime and the kind of work that Chambers does. But you are going to make a living. In terms of how I found it, because Third Six wasn't funded, so I've never had any guaranteed earnings in Chambers. Well, there's no shortage of work and there's a diverse mix of work. We do quite a lot of prosecution lists, and they pay reasonably well, and they also pay really promptly. The CPS usually pay for the lists in about 2 weeks, so your cash flow is actually generally quite good. There's also opportunities to do things like work for the Attorney General Junior scheme, which is paid at an hourly rate. And again, because it's government work, it's secure and it's paid quite promptly. I'd also say that the fees clerk in Chambers is just amazing. So, you know, you won't be sat there thinking, God, I've got all this age debt, but, you know, how am I going to pay my rent? So, yeah, and I think people in Chambers appreciate that, you know, you're working to make a living, not just as a hobby. So, yeah, I think it's absolutely doable.
Thanks, Amy. There's been a few questions in, and I think given time, this is probably the last one we'll deal with. Can final year law students apply? Have you ever given a pupillage offer to someone who is at the pre-Bptc stage? The answer is yes. And there are certainly at least 2 of them on this call who we had and gave offers of pupillage to pre-Bptc. Obviously, we're offering for pupillage to start in October 2022. So as long as all of the relevant academic qualifications are in place by then, you would be able to start pupillage with us. So I hope that answers that.
I think it's slightly connected, Dan, and it's a slight extension on that. There's a question whether you have to hold a law degree. You have to have a qualifying degree, whether that's a law degree or GDL, in order to become a barrister and well, yeah, get on the bar course, I think. The short answer is no, you don't have to have a law degree. Again, I don't have a law degree. I did a GDL. I think Alexa says not Alexa, sorry, Amy didn't have a law degree. She would have done a GDL as well. So yeah, answers that question, I think.
Well, thank you very much again to our panel for giving up their time and for all of you for attending. That's just about an hour. If there are any other questions that relate to pupillage at Chambers, please don't hesitate to drop us an email and ask them. We'll try our best to get back to all of you, but of course, if there's a load of questions, it might take us a little while. So thanks again very much, and I think we'll all sign off now. Thanks very much.